Okay, good morning. So hopefully you're all doing okay throughout the insanity that we're all going through, but we're going to make it. So yesterday you did, or 2 days ago, or whatever it was, you did factoring, and most of you did pretty well on that. I think I got back to all of you. So today we're just going to extend that into the solving part, and that's just going to be one more step. So as always, the first thing we look for is to see if there is a greatest common factor that we can factor out. And in this case, we can see that there's a 3x squared and a 21x, and obviously we can factor a 3x out. So we will factor a 3x out. So we got 3x times x minus 7. And then what we're always trying to do is trying to make each of these factors equal to 0. So it's pretty easy to see that what's going to make this piece 0 is 7. And really the easy way to think about this is I'm just going to flip the sign here because positive 7 minus 7 is 0. So I'm just going to flip the sign and I'm going to make 7. I was just about to make a 0 there. And then we ask the same question. 3 times what makes 0? And obviously that what is the 0? And so our two solutions are 0 and 7. Easy stuff. Okay. So here, we don't always have to do factoring. Sometimes we can just take the square root of both sides. So as we look at this, if we're going to take the square root of both sides, what we need to do first, though, really is isolate the variable. So we have b squared plus 8 equals 12. So we need to isolate the variable. So we're going to subtract 8 from both sides. And we get b squared equals 4. And then obviously all we need to do is take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root of the b squared, square root of the 4, and we get b equals 2. But of course you'll remember that b squared means something or a number times itself makes 4. Well, positive 2 times positive 2 makes 4, but also negative 2 times negative 2 makes 4. So we really need to make sure that we do a plus and minus. So we get both the answers, plus and minus. So there it is, b equals plus minus 2. And over here, we have the same kind of thing. So all we're going to do here is, again, we're going to isolate the x squared term. So to do that, we need to divide both sides by 16. Divide by 16. And so we get x squared equals 1/4. And again, taking the square root of both sides, we get x equals plus or minus 1/2. Easy stuff. Okay, so I've given you these two to do. Factor out the GCF and take the square root of both sides. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip the paper over and I'm going to give you 2 questions to do. And you'll pause the video and you will you'll do the problem on your own and we'll check back with you in a minute. So let's do 5x squared minus 15x equals 0. That's one problem to do. And here's the other problem. It's going to be 4x squared minus 2 equals 7. So those are your 2 problems you're going to work on. And you're going to take a moment to do that. And we'll be right back with you. Pause the video. Okay, so presumably you did okay. And you did actually the work. So as we look at this, we recognize we can factor out a 5x. So we do factor out a 5x. And then we get x minus 3. And the solution we get from here is 3. And the solution we get from here is 0. And we are done. Easy enough. And here, again, we're just going to isolate the x squared term as we did just a moment ago. So step 1 is to add 2 to both sides. So we get 4x squared equals 9. And then we divide both sides by 4. So we end up with x squared equals 9/4. And then we root both sides plus and minus, and we get plus or minus 3/2. So hopefully you got those 2 answers. And back to the lesson. Okay. And here we have a basic trinomial, which we looked at already in terms of factoring. So we're just going to factor this and set the 2 pieces equal to 0. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to make positive 6, add to make negative 5, and those are obviously v minus 2 and v minus 3. And so that's going to give us 2 and 3. And that was too easy. And down here, same kind of thing, only it's not set equal to 0 yet, so we're going to make sure that it is set equal to 0, so we'll add 6 to both sides. Add 6. So we end up with m squared minus 3m plus 2 equals 0. And we do the two-part question. What two things multiply to make positive 2, add to make negative 3, and that's m minus 2 and m minus 1. And the answers are obviously 2 and 1. Nice and easy. What do we got over here? Okay, and let me make up one for you to do on your own for that. So let's do x squared minus 4x minus 2 equals 30. So please take a moment to work on this on your own and make sure you pause the video and actually do the problem. Remember, if you don't do the push-ups, you don't get stronger. So pause the video, do the problem. Okay, so hopefully you've had time to do this. And we're just going to subtract 30 from both sides because we want to make sure it's set equal to 0. And so we have x squared minus 4x minus 32 equals 0. And then we have what two numbers multiply to make negative 32, add to make negative 4. And that's obviously x minus 8 and x plus 4. And we have 8, and we have negative 4. Easy stuff. You've done this lots of times. This should be a review for all of you. Okay, so where are we here? I did that one. So I'm down to right here. Okay, so this one requires a little bit more work, and I actually may get a separate sheet of paper for this one. Because we're not going to have enough space there. We need to use the master product rule as we did with our factoring. So I'll just write the problem over here and do the problem on this sheet of paper. So the first thing, of course, to do, as always, is to make sure this is set equal to 0. And we have 3r squared minus 5r plus 2 equals 0. And we notice this is a trinomial with the leading coefficient not equal to 1. So we will multiply the first by the last. And we get 6r squared. And we ask ourselves what two things multiply to make 6, add to make negative 5. And those are negative 3r and negative 2r. And we write those into the problem. So we have 3r squared minus 3r minus 2r plus 2 equals 0. And then when we have four terms, we divide and conquer. We look for the largest perfect square that goes into the first group, which is obviously 3r. And we get r minus 1. And we can factor a negative 2 out of the second group. And again, we get r minus 1. And r minus 1 is a common factor, so we can factor it out. R minus 1. And what's left is those two. So we get 3r minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so this one's easy, r minus 1. So we just have r equals 1, because that's how to make that 0. Now the question is how to make this one 0. Well, we'll just make a little equation and figure it out. So we got 3r minus 2 equals 0. Add 2 to both sides. And we get 3r equals 2, and r equals 2/3. So that's the answer. And there's actually a shortcut for that one too. So we can see that there's a 2 and a 3 here, there's a 2 and a 3 here. So all we need to do is flip the sign of this one to make it a positive 2 and put it over the coefficient. So flip the sign, put it over the coefficient, and you have your answer. So those are your two answers right there. And let me make you up a problem and have you do it on your own. And I forgot to make these problems up, but that's okay. Let's do this. Okay, so here's your problem to do on your own. So we have 6x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. So please take a moment to pause the video and do this problem all by your lonesomes. Okay, so hopefully you've had time and you got a correct answer. So we're just going to, as we did before, multiply the first by the last. And we're going to end up with negative 12x squared. And we ask what two numbers multiply to make negative 12 and add to make negative 1. So that's going to be 3x and negative 4x. And we just replace that with these. So we get 6x squared plus 3x minus 4x minus 2 equals 0. Divide and conquer as we talked about earlier. And then we look at the first group, and what is it that we can factor out of the first group? And that's obviously a 3x times 2x plus 1. And we can factor in negative 2 out of the second group. And that'll get us 2x plus 1. And we see 2x plus 1 is in common. And by now, you should probably know whether you got the right answer or not. Now we got 3x minus 2 is the other factor. And we do what we just talked about just a moment ago. So flip the sign, put it over the coefficient. Negative 1/2. Flip the sign, put it over the coefficient. 2/3. And there you have your answer. Okay, so last examples to do. Actually, last example to do. We're only going to do one. So here, this looks like a difference of squares, and it certainly is a difference of squares. And we can tell because 4 is a perfect square, a squared is a perfect square, and 1 is a perfect square. So we're going to factor it as though it's a perfect square problem. So remember, we have to do root plus minus. So we're going to take the square root of 4a squared, which is 2a. Take the square root of 1, which of course is obviously 1. And then we have 2a minus 1. Here we have negative 1/2 because we flip the sign and put it over that. And here we have positive 1/2 because we flip the sign and put it over the coefficient. And we're done. And that is all I have to say about that. So that's your lesson on solving by quadratics by factoring. And I'll have an assignment up for you in just a few minutes. And good luck. Have a good weekend.